Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Friday, June the 8th, 2018, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Your second daily dose of happy for the day and the last double daily dose for the week. It's always a good thing when we're coming to the end of the week because, you know, people are celebrating the weekend is here and it's summer and get to go out and do stuff and so forth. It's also kind of sad because we just finished our 10th episode for the week and it's like, oh, there's only one more over the weekend. I have to wait 3 days before we get into it again. I love doing these podcasts. They're fun.
And I love doing them too.
And and I know our listeners love listening to them because we keep getting such good responses from people, and we love them too. We think we have the best listeners in the world. So that just makes it one more reason, like, oh, geez, do I have to wait 2 more days? Oh, well. But it's all good. It's good stuff. And been wrapping things up this week, getting the week put to bed, so to speak, so we can have a nice, relaxing weekend. And hope you've been doing the same. How's your week been going?
It's been good. But you know what? I want to pick up on something you said before the show, where you were really glad that it was time to do the show.
Oh, yeah.
Because even though you didn't say these words, what you were saying in essence is you knew that the show would adjust your feeling. It would put you in a greater place of happiness and help shift you out of some stuff that wasn't as comfortable for you.
Right.
And, you know, it's not only is that true for you as a host and for me as a host, but I think that's very true for our listeners. You know, if our listeners haven't figured it out yet, listening to something that makes them feel good or gets them engaged in maybe a distraction from other stuff that's going on in their life is a really great reason to tune into our podcast on a regular basis.
Oh, boy, is that true. Yeah. I mean, I know it's good for us just in terms of having, you know, the opportunity to do the show every day. But, I mean, both of us have listened to podcasts. And it's great to listen, too. The listening is almost as good as the doing of it. I think we have a slight advantage because we actually do the interacting. But, yeah, it's great. It's so good for your mindset to be listening to positive stuff because we don't get that much of it, you know. And to have it like podcast after podcast, I mean, you can actually line them up on your smartphone, right, when you're subscribed to it. They just all kind of pop in there. So you can just listen to one after another and just inundate yourself with a mashup of LOA Today podcasts. So, yeah,
exactly.
you can do it to yourself, you know. And for those who haven't done it yet, if you haven't subscribed, go to the homepage, loatoday.net. I know most of you have, but we always get new listeners in, and new listeners, we keep encouraging them. Please go subscribe. You're going to love it. It's going to be so worthwhile for you. You're not going to believe how much it'll change your life.
I agree.
So do we have any updates, or do we go right to the book today? I mean, we've been doing a lot of updates this week, so I don't know.
I know we have. Well, I guess I have an update on Project Man or Project Relationship. Last night, I know that I had a very distinctive dream about a man in my life and us beginning a relationship. And I know I've mentioned in the past how for a long time, I just didn't ever see faces in my dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time I saw a face, it was in a relationship dream and it was with a man. And I was like shocked because I saw his face, where previous dreams, it's like I'd see all the way up to his neck. And then there was just like a giant blur where the face goes.
Yeah, I know that one.
But last night's dream definitely had a face. I mean, it was so distinctive that now, many hours after I've now waken up and gotten into my day, if I had to go to a sketch artist, I could actually describe this face. That's how clear it was in my dream.
Wow.
And I don't necessarily get the impression like, oh, the man is going to look like this. That will be a future partner for me. It was just delightful to be able to have the clarity that there was a face. Yeah. I woke up with very definite feelings of relationship building. And so for me, that just was like a great piece of evidence. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, we've talked about how do you know when you're manifesting something when it's not yet in the complete three-dimensional version? And one way you know that you're in manifestation process is when you get a thought, you could get a feeling, or you get a dream, or you can get an imagination. Mm. Any of those say that you're moving it from a thought to a thing. And so that to me is like a definite piece of evidence that I'm moving the desire for wanting a romantic relationship, it's definitely evidence that I am moving in that direction. So that's my update in that one. So that's
good.
very cool to me.
It actually reminds me of something. I had an experience where I was 17, 18 years old, and I kept dreaming about this same girl over and over again. I didn't know who she was, but it was the same person over and over again, except it was a little confusing because from one dream to the next, one night to the next, the hair color would change. Sometimes she'd be blonde, sometimes she'd be brunette, sometimes she'd be red, sometimes she'd be light blonde, sometimes dark blonde. I mean, it was very, very confusing from that perspective. But it was definitely the same girl every time. And I often wondered, is this like a precursor to meeting somebody like that? But, in high school and in college and so forth, I never met anybody like that. And after a while, I just kind of gave up on it because, I don't know, maybe it was just one of those dreams that happens where you're, getting yourself ready for relationships or something. I never really did figure it out until about 20 years later, I met Louise and didn't make a connection at all. Don't get me wrong. But I met Louise. We went out. We became close very quickly. And within a year and a quarter, we were married. And about, I'd say 2 or 3, 4 years after that, we were living in Virginia. And I don't remember what the exact sequence of events was, but something led to like an emotional revelation for me because I remember being in the bedroom in the afternoon, getting dressed or something, I forget what. And all of a sudden I had like this huge surge of information flow through me. And I realized that the girl in my dream had the same face as my wife.
Wow.
And I said, no, that can't be. It was 20 years ago. It was 20 years before I even met Louise. How could that possibly be? And then I realized what the meaning was of the changing hair color. My wife changes hair color. Sometimes she likes to go as a blonde. Sometimes she likes to get a dark brown. I mean, it varied. In fact, she has all the different pictures of her throughout the years where she changed her hair color.
That's cool. That's very cool. Well, when we put something in our vortex, it's ready to roll. And it's just a matter of when are we ready to connect with it.
Yeah.
And, I know I like to think that when I had met my husband, even though we're now divorced, but when I met him, he and I talked about how we had literally at one point in time lived in the exact same apartment building, but we lived in it 2 years apart. Like I left and then 2 years later he moved in.
Mm.
And we talked about all the different places we'd been in the Dallas area. And it's like we had overlapped each other so many times. And when I met his mother, I'm like, gosh, she looks really familiar. And she lives very close to one of the places I lived. And I thought, I can guarantee I've seen her in a grocery store before because she was so radiantly beautiful. Her aesthetics caught my attention. But, he and I used to talk about, like, he used to say, gosh, well, then why didn't we meet earlier? And I said, oh, you wouldn't have liked me. I said, we're a match with the current version of me, but you would have so abhorred the earlier version of me. He just laughed and he told me what he was like. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think I would have liked you either.
You have no idea how much of a parallel that is to me and Louise. Because
really?
the two of us lived about 2 or 3 miles apart, but we shopped at the same supermarket for about 3.5 years. Never saw each other, which is a little surprising just because I'm taller than even your husband was. I'm 6'8", and literally, I mean, I've had people stop me in the street who said, "Oh, I saw you, over such and such." I mean, I stand up that much higher than everybody else, so they just remember me. And
you really stand out.
Oh yeah, yeah. So after 3.5 years, if there was ever any occasion at all where we were in the same store, she would have seen me. She may not have connected it right away, but she would have definitely have seen me. She never saw me. And to make the whole situation even more confusing, after we met, I'm reversing sequences here. Before we met, we didn't see each other in the supermarket at all. After we met, every time that we went to any store independently, we instantly saw each other. I mean, it wasn't like, it wasn't like we had to go out of our way to find it. And just like you said, you wouldn't have liked me. That's exactly what Louise's answer was to me. That's why she says we didn't meet. You would not have liked me. I was too codependent at the time. I've since dealt with that, but at the time I was codependent. I'm thinking,
Wow.
wait a minute, you're telling the exact same story that happened to us.
That is really fascinating. And another aspect of my dream that I realized, because I always ask my inner being afterwards, like, so what am I to get from this? If I don't automatically have like what it feels like, and I know, but I like to ask for more. And one of the things that I started to really pay attention to was I was so aware, and this is ironic because of how tall you are, I was so aware of how tall this man was in my dream.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were scenes in the dream where we were standing up, laying down, sitting down, but in every sequence, I was so aware of how tall he was.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, he was somewhere 6'4", 6'5", 6'6".
Mm-hmm.
And the more I stared at him in my dream, the more I'm like, yes, I love men that are tall. I love, love, love tall men. Always have, always probably will. And so anyway, I went out and ran an errand today. And while I was out, I was thinking about this. And I thought, what is it about tall men? And I thought, different question or different thought. And I kind of like shifted in the middle of it. And I went, oh, I believe this dream was letting me know that my desire to be in a relationship with a tall man is okay. Because I have questioned myself, like, am I just like being superficial, or am I ruling out all the wonderful men that are 5'5", 5'6", 5'7"? Am I blowing them off and they could be a perfect relationship for me? And I was kind of getting, no, I'm not dismissing other men because of their height. This is my preference. Just like a man who's going to be attracted to me is going to be attracted because of his preferences, and that I fit that, whether it's height, size, hair color, eyes, whatever. And then I kind of flashed into, I watch a lot of $1 Million Matchmaker shows, and I see these millionaires coming on the program. Now, first of all, you'd think someone who's a millionaire should not have a hard time getting a date. All right.
Well, I can understand that. I can understand that because one thing about a millionaire is that millionaires tend to get people who are after the money. And so they're going to go hit on a lot for that kind of thing the moment that anybody finds out that they're wealthy.
And that could be definitely part of it. But I was thinking about, I've watched so many millionaires sit in front of Patty Stanger, who's the, expert matchmaker, and they tell their story and blah, blah, blah. And I think to myself, wow, on the surface, this is the kind of person you would not think would have difficulty finding a connection. Mm-hmm. And that was the thought, the memory that was flashing through my mind as I was thinking about me desiring a tall man. What I was getting was, so I consider a tall man like premium, like someone else might consider a rich man premium. I think of tallness as a premium attribute, and thinking, well, why would they would have so many to choose from, in terms of other women because, they're the premium one. So
instead of a gold digger, you're a height digger? Is that it?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. But what was so cool is what I was coming to understand was they may not see their height as a premium just because I do. Just like I may not recognize some attribute of me as a premium, I might even think of it as a deterrent. But, we all like different things for reasons that we do. And I kind of felt like finding the tall man that's interesting to me is like finding a needle in a haystack. Mm. But you know what? Even if it is, the law of attraction knows how to get right through that haystack to find that perfect needle.
That is true.
And I was like, oh, okay. And so just kind of let me settle into what I desire and what I prefer is acceptable. There's nothing wrong with it. And I just thought, isn't it weird that I was making something that I desire a badness or a wrongness?
No, not weird. I'd say that's more common than I would think people realize, perhaps. But I would say that's a very common thing. We live in the age of political correctness, and political correctness puts you into a defensive posture. No matter, it doesn't matter what your political viewpoint is. You just kind of puts you there. It puts you into a defensive posture, and so we have a very strong tendency in those defensive postures to, defend ourselves and to be defensive.
Well, And like I said a couple weeks ago, like on eHarmony, I'm now like making more connections, and more men are reaching out to me because my man channel is finally open and
Right.
ready for business.
Yeah.
And I look at pictures and I see, okay, well, he's 5'7" or 5'8", and I'm like, well, he's really not all that I'm looking for. I read his profile, but then I get stuck on the height. And then I ask myself, are you just saying no because of his height? Or are you really saying no because you don't feel a resonance? Well, the truth is I don't feel resonance, but the only part I'm like holding as like the focus is, oh, but I'm dismissing him because of his height, and that's such a bad thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But today, I guess it really kind of reiterated for me with this wonderful dream that my desire is to have a tall man in my life. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Not
That's
at all.
my desire. Just like someone else may really desire to have a job in the sewer industry because that really turns them on. Well, who am I to say they shouldn't do it?
I appreciate them.
Working in the sewer industry is not something that I have a passion for, but I sure am grateful for those that do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love how dreams show up. They can speak all sorts of wonderful things into our life that, either are validating or that we don't realize that we're in the process of manifesting. But I can see that I'm in the process of manifesting exactly what I want. So that was a happiness factor for the day.
That's a good way to wind up the week, to have a happiness factor like that one. That's really good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So let's see. I think I don't really have anything else to. Do you have any more updates
Nope.
to do? I don't think I have anything else. So why don't we go on to the book? The book, of course, is The Law of Attraction, the basics of the teachings of Abraham. We're in part 4, The Art of Allowing, and we're in a subsection that is entitled Allowing from Extreme Poverty to Financial Well-Being, which I suspect a lot of people, not suspect, I can tell from reading on Facebook, a lot of people are interested in that. They're coming from a difficult circumstance and they want to go to financial well-being and abundance. Who wouldn't,
oh my
actually?
Gosh, there are more books, seminars, teachers, gurus, posts, bloggers on the subject of money than I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, it's a popular subject. So let's see what Jerry and Abraham have to say about it. Jerry says, the next subject I would like to discuss would be the area of wealth and prosperity. During my childhood, I lived at the poverty end of it, like living in chicken houses and tents and caves and so on and so forth. That's quite a childhood. And then in 1965, I found the book Think and Grow Rich, which gave me a different perspective of how to look at things. And from that day forward, my financial life spiraled upward. From living in my Volkswagen bus, I went on to creating 6-figure and then 7-figure annual incomes. Wow.
And Abraham says, what do you think took place in that changing of your perspective from reading that book?
Jerry answers, well, what I remember the most is I began for the first time in my adult life to focus only on what I wanted, more or less exclusively. But I'd like to hear your perspective on that phenomenon.
Abraham says, you achieved an understanding that you could have what you wanted. The desire was already in place from the living of life, but in reading that book, you came to believe that it was possible, and the book caused you to begin to allow your desire to be realized.
So once again, allowing. Okay.
You know what? That just reading that caused me to think this. I've always wondered how it is, because I have been an avid reader of self-help books since I was a teenager. And I've always wondered how it is that I read these fabulous books, I get these incredible ideas, but somehow whatever I learned in the book never really got implemented in my life. It's kind of like the wisdom that I read went on what I call my mental shelf, but it really didn't get integrated into the application of how I live life. But this passage, go ahead.
No, I was just going to comment that actually I think is a very common thing. That's really what keeps the self-help get wealthy industry in business.
Well, exactly. But like in this first chapter, Jerry's saying, hey, in 1965, I found the book Think and Grow Rich. And he's saying it gave him a different perspective. It changed his life immediately. And he went from poverty to making a 6- and then 7-figure income. And I'm thinking, how did he do that? Because I sure never did that. But I think this last paragraph by Abraham really nails it and answers my question, which is that he already had the desire in place from the living of his life. And in reading the book, it ignited his belief in what was possible. And when he ignited his belief, it then, I think, further ignited his allowing.
So you're suggesting that there are many people who are interested in books about how to attain more wealth, but the desire wasn't really there before?
It might have been there, but it's like I see three components: desire, belief, and allow.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a strong desire in the positive because you're so focused on the I don't have it, that's where resistance comes in. And I'm kind of getting the idea from what Jerry has written and how he's written it, that he had a strong desire for the positive, and he was ready to release or no longer be focused on what he didn't have. In other words, he got a hold of this book, Think and Grow Rich, and what ignited in him was what was possible, and that's, I believe, what he focused on. At least that's what I'm taking from this, because there are so many ways, we as human beings can, take in information. And I'll just use myself as an example. When I would read many, many, many books on how to become wealthy, on how to create successful businesses, I learned the information and I was like, oh, I can see how that would work. And then I put it on the mental shelf. Like, one day I'll use this information to make $1 gazillion.
Yeah, that I can definitely identify with, because for the way I would think about it was, okay, I understand that conceptually, and that's as far as I went with it.
Right, but I think Jerry was ready to implement and move on it the moment he read it. Like, he was so ripe for the action steps that it seems to me like that's what happened. Because like for where I am right now in my business process, like I said, I've been reading books, listening to seminars, taking courses, etc., on building a successful business. And I never really pulled the trigger, even though people would say, well, Wendy, you certainly know enough to pull the trigger. And I'm like, yeah, but somehow knowing enough didn't feel like it was enough. And it's really not, because you really have to have the desire and the intensity to want to go forward. And where I am right now, I can tell is very different than where I've ever been, because now I've started to listen again. I had put away business stuff for a while, but I'm starting to listen again. I found a new business podcast the other day, and I was like, whoa, I'm in a different place. I'm listening to what these different experts are talking about, and I'm like, ooh, I'm ready to take those action steps. I am in a different place. So I think what we're listening to, listening in on the conversation between Jerry and Abraham is, I've read this before, but I never got out of it what I'm getting now. Jerry he had primed the pump with his desire. He was so ready to move out of his VW bus. He was ready, but not from I'm sick of this. But I'm ready to move up. I'm ready to move out. I'm ready to go to the next stage of my life where things are of greater value to me.
One of the things I get when I read the Facebook posts from people who are talking about, please help me, I'm trying to attract the money or the job or a big windfall or something, winning the lottery, whatever it is. You can just tell in most of those cases where, and by most of those, I mean the cases where they really spell out how important it is to them, just how passionate they are. What is never clear to me, well, not never, what is usually not clear to me is whether or not what they're passionate about is the thing end or the lack of thing end of the stick.
Yeah.
Because they'll tell you that they're not focused on the lack end, but half of what they say does suggest they're focused on the lack end, and half of what they say suggests they're focusing on the thing end. And I never really know how to resolve that one.
Well, and while I was listening to a whole bunch of Abraham in the background while I was working today, and the thought that we're talking about is what really was very prominent in my thinking, which is there is such a slight distinction on the surface between having a conversation or a soliloquy about talking about what you want and talking about it from the perspective of you're on the positive end of the stick versus the lack end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a listener, you have to really tune in to listen to the words, the intensity, the tonality, and the energy behind it. But when you're in it and the one who's doing the speaking, it's like oftentimes, unless you're a really advanced student of law of attraction, the one who's doing the speaking is completely unaware of any impure vibration or direction toward the thing that they want.
Yeah,
so many people are unaware that they're actually talking about what they don't want.
And of course, there's the other kind too, because sometimes you get somebody who is aware. They recognize, oh yeah, I've got to be focusing on the thing end, not the lack end, and so they'll try to word everything in terms of the thing end, and yet you get the sense there's the lack end that's in the back of the conversation that they haven't brought up, but it's kind of like dangling there,
Oh yeah, I remember back in the day when Oprah had her, broadcast show on Monday through Friday, and when this kind of subject was being brought to the forefront, it would be fascinating to me to watch even the panelists who were experts trying to speak with such a sense of deliberate intent to speak all the, quote, right and positive words.
Right.
But yet you could still sense, yeah, that's an act. That's not real. That's not authentic. They're trying their best, and I give them an A for effort, but there's really more of a, gosh, why don't I have what I want yet? Mm-hmm. In it. And that's the distinction that I was really focused on today, is how it's such a fine tuning. Abraham likes to talk about a radio dial, the old fashioned radio dials, where you would have to tune it like a 0.10 of a degree to really tune into the station that you're wanting to listen to.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
And I really think that's sometimes where we are as law of attraction practitioners, wanting to use it deliberately for our advantage. And how we do it is, I think, oftentimes by not getting what we want. And we're like, yeah, but I could swear I'm doing all the right stuff. So where am I missing it? And sometimes that's when we catch, oh, there is an underlying feeling of not feeling good enough, or not feeling like I'm worthy of having this success, or whatever that negative feeling might be. It might be so slight, but if it's there, it could be enough to trip it up. And that's pretty fascinating to me. So, yay, Jerry and Abraham, because I feel like just in this little teeny discussion that they had, it fleshed out a really important distinction, that you can't just read a book and everyone's not going to run out and go read Think and Grow Rich now, and it's going to change their life into 6 and 7 incomes.
As much as I like Think and Grow Rich, I like the book. In fact, I like it so much that Joel and I did with that book what you and I are doing with this book. We did chapter by chapter discussion of it. And yet, I have to tell you, the first time and even the second and third times that I read Think and Grow Rich, I walked away from it not really having a clear idea what to do. I didn't get it. And I think part of the reason I didn't get it is because he was trying to write to an audience of people who, the majority of whom were immersed in Christianity, and I was already alienated from Christianity. So that was creating a block for me right there. But part of it was I think this is partly because of his editor and his publisher, but there were times when I wish he had actually focused in on, here's what it is that I'm trying to say to you. If you're not getting it, then let me make it really clear. Instead, what he would say is, what I'm talking about here will be clear to those who are ready to receive it. Well, that didn't help me. I still didn't get it. Okay, that's nice, but that really doesn't help me at all. That's why I was frustrated with the book. So when I hear about somebody like Jerry who did get it and was able to, just kind of latch right in.
He was ready to receive it.
He was ready to receive it. there's a part of me that's a little bit jealous. Like, well, why couldn't I get it? Why did he get it and I couldn't understand it? And I'm a pretty smart guy.
I don't know. Is it because you didn't live in a VW bus in the earlier part of your life?
Yeah, I guess I hadn't fallen low enough. I don't know.
You hadn't lived in a cave. What other things did he live in?
Yeah, he had quite a list there, wasn't it? I mean, chicken houses, and tents, and caves,
and so forth.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So that's what I missed out on, huh?
I'm going to say I've heard it said. I've kind of seen it, by just kind of witnessing other people's lives, that people who have a really intense early life growing up that was really intense on the negative, if they were able to somehow catch a glimpse of what is possible, when they flip the switch, their what is possible becomes bigger than anybody else's on the planet. And Oprah, to me, is like a perfect example of that, because her early years were really subpar, very unpleasant. Almost like she felt like one of those kids who were like almost kicked to the curb, useless, nobody wanted, nobody thought she could ever amount to anything.
Right.
They just assumed write her off, and like, look at how she turned her life around.
Yeah, in a big way, big way, really big way.
Yeah. I've always been very curious if we could ever discover what that magic moment is that causes a person like an Oprah to somehow hold on to a level of faith and hope in turning their life around.
I asked that question of Joel, actually. I mean, now Joel hasn't had the kind of turnaround that Oprah had, but he had a pretty big turnaround.
But he ate out of dumpsters, so
yeah.
I'd put him in that category.
I'd say he qualifies. And I asked him that question, and he couldn't tell me. He really couldn't tell me. I mean, he said when he was at his lowest point and trying to find his way out, I think somebody did introduce him to The Secret or to the Law of Attraction or something like that. And he just tried to like live day to day and do the best he could. He couldn't point to any one single point of turnaround. It wasn't like it happened from here. He knew that those were all important points in his life. He knew that every one of them, even though they seemed like the lowest of possible lows where he couldn't possibly climb out of it, he now looks back at them with fondness because they helped strengthen him. They helped him gain that sense of self-confidence that he needed and determination and persistence and so forth. But he can't, at the same time, he says he can't really point at any one of them. Well, that's where I got my determination. That's where I got my persistence. It was like a combination of them. It was like this blur, so to speak.
Well, I'm certainly not a millionaire yet. I put that caveat there because I know that millionaire is on its way for me. But even though I'm not there yet, I'm in what I would call very comfortable place in my life financially, at least more so than I've ever been. And, I've had people ask me, well, how did you get to that point? Mm-hmm. And I guess kind of like Joel, I can go back to my grimmest, darkest day financially, which I think was in, I'm going to guess somewhere 2002, 2003. And I remember the distinct moment when I was a secret shopper for Jack in the Box.
Really?
That was one of the 3 jobs that I had, yes. And so, yes, I was one of those people that I had 3 jobs. My husband, I think, had 2 jobs, and we could barely, keep getting the rent paid.
Right.
And my car had already blown up. His car was not doing well. And I didn't like driving his car because it's a standard, and I've always driven automatic transmission. And I remember, I hate the heat, right? So I'm at one of my Jack in the Box jobs where, as a secret shopper, I was in this particular scenario, I was supposed to go through the drive-through, order a particular menu, and then when I leave, I taste the food, taste the drink, and then I assess, what the service was like, etc.
Right.
And I'm probably about the fifth person in line at the drive-thru. Oh, and also I had to be there at a certain time. Okay. So it's not like I could just have waited till there'd be no business. I had to be in line. And so I was about the fifth car in line, and the air conditioner in my husband's car was not great. And especially if you're sitting in idle. So I'd have to like have the windows down and have the car in neutral. And it was one of those 106-degree Texas days with 7,000 degree humidity or 7,000% humidity. And I was melting. Now, for me, the reason I don't like the heat, I mean, I am a Norwegian, Danish, Swedish kind of, that's my DNA. And like, that's my internal mechanism. So like when it's hot, it's miserable to me. And it took what felt like an eternity to move up to the next car. You know, it's like one car would finally go through. So now instead of being car number 5, I'm car number 4. And as I was going through, just waiting for the line to move, I remember being in tears, just crying my eyes out, saying, oh my God, I can't imagine life being any worse than this. By the time it was all said and done, by the time, you know, I paid the gasoline that it cost for me to drive to all these places, et cetera, you know, I was barely making $6 an hour.
Wow.
And I sweating and being miserable. And I just couldn't imagine life being any worse. Now that might not sound horrible to somebody else, but to me, I was like at the end of my rope. It was so uncomfortable for me on so many levels.
Sure.
And I really didn't see an end in sight. So that to me was like my lowest place financially. And yet somehow, like how I got from there to here in 2018, I would say has been a incremental positive stepping. I mean, things never got worse than that moment, and things started getting better incrementally in very small doses. But I do know that I have always had in the back of my mind, I've always had an underlying belief in improvement, that things can get better. Now, where that comes from, I don't really know. But I've always lived with that belief that things can get better. So even when they were like at their worst, I somehow consoled myself that I couldn't do it while I was melting. But once I got out of the drive-thru and I got the meal and I could put the windows on and the AC on, it's like I could console myself. It's going to get better. Don't know how, but it's going to get better. And little by little, it gets better, and it gets better, and it gets better. And it is fascinating to me how some people make that turn and some people don't. Because if I was another kind of person, I might have ended my life after that. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because that's one of the reasons that Jerry attracted Abraham into his life through Esther, because he had wanted to help people. He had tried to help people improve their financial lot in life, and he was frustrated by how many times he wasn't able to help them. They would do what he told them to do and so forth, and their lives wouldn't get better. That was a big motivator for him, as I understand the story.
That is interesting. You know, I've tried to help a lot of people in my life. Now I'm speaking more so of those who didn't ask for my help.
Okay.
But they kind of sort of wanted it, so they sort of listened. But, you know, I recognize those that I helped or those that I attempted to help, but weren't in a place that they were really asking from a deep place of desire and wanting, today are probably no better off than when I shared with them all the gems that I had available. So having a strong desire, I think, is a huge, huge, huge necessity to having your life go in a direction that is pleasing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Abraham has stated that on a number of occasions that having a strong desire trumps belief. That even if your belief isn't very strong, if your desire is strong enough, it'll just get you there anyway. Yeah.
Which I love that. I mean, I actually have used that recently, talking with somebody, that having a very strong, intense desire can trump resistance.
Fascinating too.
It is fascinating.
Well, let's move on to the next section because it's basically the same theme, but instead of applying it to finances, now we're going to apply it to relationships. Okay. And so this one's entitled Allowing Relationships and the Art of Selfishness.
Woohoo! That sounds fun.
And Jerry says, another area, a big one that I'd like to talk about, is the area of relationships. There were times when I found it difficult for me to allow friends to have their own thoughts and beliefs and their own inappropriate, in quotation marks, activities.
And Abraham says, when you are using the word allow in this sense, what do you mean?
I felt as if they should think and act the way I wanted them to think and act. And when they didn't, it made me extremely and often angrily uncomfortable.
And so you were observing what they were doing or what they were speaking. You felt negative emotion, which is your signal that you were not in a state of allowing.
Interesting point. So
let's unpack that a little bit.
Oh,
let's
okay.
Unpack that. Go on. So Jerry was feeling like people should do things a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And it made him uncomfortable and angry, or in my vernacular, pissed off because they weren't doing what he wanted.
Yep.
And Abraham, in essence, is saying, because he was really focused on what he wanted them to do, and it made him angry, and that's an indicator that he wasn't in a state of allowing.
Right.
Which that kind of brings me back to what I talk about quite often. What they were thinking and acting like was none of his business, and he needed to stay in his own lane.
This is true.
Because when we stay in our own lane, we have control over how we respond to ourselves. But when you're trying to get other people to do things or the way we want them to, we have no control over that. So it's so much to my advantage to try to pay attention to what I think somebody else should be doing. And that's where I tell myself, Wendy, stay in your lane. It's none of your business. Stay in your lane. It's none of your business.
Which is a good message to give yourself. It occurs to me, though, it's actually possible to stay in your lane and still harbor resentment that they're not doing what you wanted them to do.
Oh, this is true. This is true.
Which means that you're really not staying in your lane. I mean, you're not saying anything, so overtly you're staying in your lane, but covertly you're still out there trying to interfere in someone else's life.
And, you have an excellent point there. So let me rephrase. So when I stay in my lane, let go of all resistance to what the rest of the world is doing and just be happy in my lane.
And I can speak with some authority about that letting go of the resistance over time, because that's what I found that it takes. I have not succeeded in just, okay, I'm looking now at myself, and I know there are a bunch of resistances, so I'm going to wave my wet magic wand, and poof, all the resistances melt away. That's not the way it works for me. For me, I have to find them one at a time and let them go one at a time, and over time, the resistance level drops and drops and drops and drops, which means while I am in that process, I am simultaneously still dealing with the fact that other people aren't doing what I want them to do.
And we can have really big epiphanies where we start to pivot and go in a different direction. But I also think that, living life and recognizing how now we've changed based on the epiphany is a part of the process. The living of life and mounting new experiences on our side of the tally sheet that says, yes, this is what I want. Yes, this is what I want. I think is a really valuable point in building our confidence and building a belief system that says, oh, here's how we do this thing. This is good. This is working, but to have it just in a mental state without having life experience, it's kind of hollow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I agree, too, that it's important to build the belief, especially since I now understand from Abraham that building a belief is about thinking the same thought over and over and over and over again. So that's what I do. I just keep thinking thoughts like, the world is improving. More and more people are becoming interested in feeling good. More and more people are becoming interested in positive psychology. More and more people are feeling interested in living in their own lane and enjoying it and not really worrying about what's going on with anybody else. More and more people are doing that. And as I keep saying that, and as I hear you keep saying it, and others say it in the show and so forth, you know what? It starts to become more true for me. I start to believe it.
And then, of course, you also start to attract more evidence of that thought and that belief.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And that helps reinforce it, doesn't it?
Exactly, and that was my point. The reinforcement thing comes in because there's more repetition of the same thing over and over. And it's like, once you start to see something in mass, it's hard to believe the contrary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, think about how many years ago, gosh, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that I first started hearing people talk about being green and having energy conservation.
First time I heard that, I thought they were talking about Kermit the Frog.
Kermit the Frog. Okay. Well, who knows? Maybe Kermit was the first green animal on the planet. But, you know, when I first heard about global warming and recycling and, you know, preserving the forests, not that I disagreed with any of these ideas, but I wasn't like jumping on the bandwagon, you know, and then it was followed by, you know, organic eating and, you know, the soil doesn't have the same level of nutrients as it once did. And, you know, the pesticides are becoming too toxic for us. And it's like, that was kind of a whole wave of new information.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard it and went, but it didn't really grab my attention in a way that I wanted to be an activist or do anything different. But I think it's probably been about at least 30 years now since I first heard about all that. And being green is just, somehow it seeped into my life. I prefer to eat organic. If I don't, it's not the end of the world, but it's my preference. Do I prefer to have, you know, a cow? I'm a beef eater. I now prefer to eat a cow that, by the way, one bite at a time. I prefer to eat the cow that like lived happily on a pasture and, you know, was able to eat the grass versus one that was like corralled and barely could move and was fed grain, because I believe the energy of the cow was a happy cow. So when he's slaughtered so I can eat him, I know that's an odd thing to say, but you know, he's slaughtered so I can eat him. I like to know that he was a happy cow before that happened versus one that was all tense, because I believe, you know, if I'm eating him, I'm eating the energy that was a part of him. But 30 years ago, that whole idea was like poppycock to me. Like, oh, give me a break. You know, that means nothing. And today it's like it has so seeped into our societal conversation that I just kind of naturally go there. And so, you know, when I'm kind of hearing almost a thread in what we're talking about is things just kind of come on slowly, incrementally, and before you know it, we've changed.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't necessarily set out to, I mean, we wanted to change, we wanted improvement, but we didn't maybe focus on it with a great intensity. It just sort of happened, is how it feels. But yet nothing just sort of happens. We start to choose different thoughts.
Which plays right into what we were talking about regarding the intensity of desire. Because clearly the intensity of the desire in where being green was concerned wasn't that high for you. But it didn't need to be, because you were willing to let it happen over time. Whereas somebody who is intensely interested in green, they made changes pretty quickly. In fact,
and really
they probably became evangelists too.
The ones who were intense about it are probably the very reason why I have adopted those thoughts and beliefs.
Yeah, could be, sure.
You know, because I watched videos, I saw movies, you know, whatever influence is becoming an overwhelming thought in our society sort of slips into televisions and movie scripts. And, you know, it's kind of like incrementally we sort of just have those ideas presented to us in a way that we don't feel defensive over it. And before you know it, we've accepted it, which I think is pretty fascinating.
It is, yeah. Well, it shows a number of things. It shows how, I'm not sure what the word is, susceptible is a little bit more negative than what I have in mind. Receptive we are to ideas that are not what we're consciously focusing on. We can receive stuff that is kind of on the periphery of our experience, and yet still be influenced by it, and influenced by it either for the positive or the negative, depending on how we decide to interpret it.
Well, it was probably 20 years ago. A dear friend of mine was conversing with me about organic food. And she was telling me how and why organic is the best and how and why I should make that choice. And I just said, well, where do you get this stuff? And so she would explain. I said, well, I don't have any stores like that near me. And she's like, oh, well, just look them up. You may have to travel further. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm a convenience person. If something's not convenient, I won't do it. That's just who I am. Convenience is a huge value in my life. But then it was maybe 10 years later, I was visiting her, and I was in a different place in my life, and more healthy type stores had now sprung up in my Dallas area. And I said to her, okay, I'm going to be with you for a week. I already know in advance I'm going to be eating organic because that's all you'll eat. And I said, will you teach me? Like, literally, I don't know even how to read a food label on a can or on a food package to know how I would know something was organic. And so she took me to the Whole Foods in her area, and we walked through it, and she told me how she grocery shopped, and we looked at labels, and I could ask her questions. It was a fabulous mentorship, let me tell you. Mm-hmm. And so when I came home, I went, okay, I'm going to go to the Whole Foods in my area and see if I can replicate what she taught me. And little by little, I was getting better at it. Now, I didn't become an organic eater overnight because the Whole Foods that was near me wasn't like close. It wasn't as convenient as the, quote, regular grocery store. So I was eating kind of a mixture. But, over time, I now have like 3 different healthy type grocery stores to choose from that are pretty close by for me. And so I guess why I'm saying this is those who have been really passionate and had great desire and intensity about eating in this way have paved the way for me to eat this way, because now convenience, which is one of the important values in my life, now it has met that criteria.
Yeah, I
now have
that.
Convenience. Yeah, because I don't have to go very far. And even my, quote, regular grocery store, which is only like 5 miles away from the house, they have a huge organic selection now. So it makes it really easy to buy that kind of food. And so I bless the people who have really strong, huge desires and want to change and make a difference, because once they do what they do, it really paves a path for those of us who are like me, who would like to go in that direction, but I wasn't willing to do the heavy lifting, so to speak.
It's interesting because you were describing 2 different processes that worked congruently and together to get you to where you are right now. One process was distance from the store. And the further away the store was, the less open you were to the whole concept. But then the way you told the story was, over time, you kind of relaxed that. And when that happened, stores got closer. Which is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the Whole Foods is probably about 15 miles away, which isn't far in distance, but it's going into the heart of Dallas, and it's ugly traffic. So it becomes nightmarish. I have a Sprouts grocery store that's only about 25 minutes away, but traffic is really good to get there. And there's lots of other shopping I already do in that area. So that kind of becomes hey, since I'm heading out there, I think I'll go grocery shopping at Sprouts while I'm there. And then there's a health food store or a healthy food grocery store right next to my chiropractor, which I do once a month. So I just make it a point that every time I visit my chiropractor, I go to that store immediately after and buy whatever foods are there. And so my convenience factor has definitely been met. And then, of course, I have, the regular grocery store, which out here is Kroger. And the fact that they've expanded their food line to incorporate so many of the brands that I'd been buying at these other stores, now they're getting my business, and so, yeah, my convenience factor has been met in multiple ways. And because my girlfriend took the time to teach me how to read a label and understand what things meant, that was like the primer for me. And so I would say I've been pretty organic oriented for about 8 years now. And that's just, I mean, if I go out to a restaurant, I don't ask the waiter, can you check to see if this is organic? You know, I'm okay with eating what I choose to eat, but I'm selective about the restaurants I go to. But, you know, it really all comes down to, I've made a huge drastic change to how I eat versus how I grew up. But it wasn't a big, I am now going to eat organic only. It just sort of happened little by little. And it's funny because I've been spending more time with my younger sister, and she works at a grocery store chain. She works at Kroger, and she has for like almost 30 years now. So she's very aware of what their product line is, and she'll shoot me little pictures that she takes of things, and she goes, is this something you eat? Because this is on clearance. What about this? What about that? And before you know it, and she even said to me yesterday, she goes, you know, I'm kind of becoming more okay with the idea of eating organic. Because she used to just go, I cannot believe you pay this much for food. You know, and I'm like, yeah, but it's healthier. I feel good eating it. You know, I can afford it. And she's like, oh, but that's like, you're paying twice as much than what I pay. And I'm like, I know. That's also part of why I didn't do it for a very long time, because I said I couldn't afford it. But as the grocery stores have shown up, the food prices have also dropped. You know, organic is not always twice or more expensive than, quote, the generic regular brands.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Whole Foods actually started like a few hours away from you, didn't they? I think they started in Texas.
They may have.
I think I may be wrong. I think they started in Austin, which is only a few hours away from you, isn't it?
4 hours.
Yeah. So not all that far away, really.
Well, I wasn't going to drive to Austin, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm sure. If you weren't going to drive 15 miles, Austin was definitely out of range.
Oh, well, it's interesting because, you know, where, you know, we started in the book and where we've actually gone in conversation, I can see how we really have built upon a theme. And it really has to do with having a strong desire.
Oh, yeah.
It's really the undergirding key to whatever it is you want to see show up in your life. You've got to have a strong desire.
I also wanted to pile on to what you've been talking about in terms of wanting to eat the higher quality food. Louise is really, really big on that. In fact, all due respect to your sister, but Louise hates Kroger because she doesn't like the quality of the fresh produce there. The store that she liked that we had that was also near us was a store out of New York called Wegmans. And if you ever get a chance to go to a Wegmans store, I don't think they're as far south as Texas, but if you ever get a chance, check out Wegmans. They have some of the best produce you have ever seen in your life. Just absolutely top quality. And when you eat it, a tomato tastes like a tomato rather than something that's had all the taste bred out of it. And, you know, a cucumber tastes like a cucumber. Squash tastes like squash. I mean, it has all of the flavors. So just a little shout out to Wegmans. And please send a store to Connecticut. We really want one here.
Well, and, you know, I got so into eating organic meats that, like, I'm like, I am a big time online shopper. Surely there's a way to find stuff. And it took time until enough people started doing it, and like it became more critical mass. But I buy all of my meats now, all my organic meats online.
No kidding.
As a matter of fact, one of the suppliers is out of Australia, but it like comes to a place, I think in Oklahoma, and then it gets sent out to me with dry ice. And I mean, very fresh, very tasty. And I'm like, yay. And that to me is also part of, I have been asking for a long time for what I'm looking for to show up online, and then it did.
Well, there it is. Very good. Sadly, we have to leave it there, but we hope you have a great weekend. Wendy, I hope you have a good weekend.
I plan to, and I hope you do too, as well as all of our listeners.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye now.